One quiet Saturday afternoon, I was stretched out on the couch, lazily flipping through television channels, not really watching anything. The house was wrapped in that kind of easy, gentle calm that makes you believe nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. From the kitchen, I could hear Emma humming softly to herself as she prepared a late lunch, the sound of pans and spices mixing into the rhythm of a peaceful day. Everything felt perfectly ordinary, safe, unshaken. That illusion shattered with one phone call. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an unknown number, but something in my gut twisted before I even picked it up. I hesitated, then answered. A cold, unfamiliar voice came through the line. "Mr. Taylor, you need to sit down." My heart dropped. The woman on the line introduced herself as Detective Mason from the City Police Department. I was already standing, but my knees buckled beneath the weight of her tone, and I sank back onto the couch, feeling the blood drain from my face. Emma peered around the corner, her brow furrowed in concern. "What is it?" she asked gently, but I held up a trembling finger, signaling her to wait. I could barely breathe. The detective's voice remained steady. "There's been an incident. It's about your brother, Mark." I felt the air leave my lungs. I hadn't spoken to Mark in nearly a year. Emma rushed over and sat beside me, her eyes searching mine, trying to make sense of the dread on my face. I looked at her and forced out the words. "It's Mark. Something happened." She didn't need the details to understand. She knew our history was complicated, strained by silence and resentment, but she also knew how much I still cared for him, despite everything. Detective Mason explained that Mark had been found unconscious in a motel room and that they didn't believe it was an accident. I could barely process what I was hearing. Mark had struggled with addiction in the past, yes, but he'd been clean for over a year. At least, that's what I had believed. That's what I wanted to believe. I gave the detective everything she needed, every piece of information I could recall, and told her I'd come immediately. Emma insisted on driving me, reading the shock in my posture. I was in no state to hold a steering wheel. The car ride was cloaked in silence. My thoughts spiraled regret, fear, guilt tangled together in a storm I couldn't escape. All I could think about was our last conversation, a bitter fight over money. I told him to grow up, to stop leaning on me like I owed him something. That was the last thing I ever said to my brother. And now, I didn't even know if I'd get the chance to take it back. When we arrived at the hospital, Detective Mason met us outside the emergency room. Her face was serious, but not grim, and that gave me the smallest flicker of hope. She led us through the sterile hallways to the ICU, explaining along the way that Mark had overdosed, but it wasn't self-inflicted. They had reason to believe someone else had injected him, that it was deliberate. My mind couldn't catch up. None of it felt real. But the moment I saw him, everything collapsed. Mark was lying in a hospital bed, pale, tubes snaking from his arms, machines keeping time with his fragile heartbeat. He looked smaller than I remembered, like life had drained from him even before this. I stood there frozen, my chest aching, tears threatening to spill. Emma stood behind me, one hand on my back, the other gently gripping my arm. I whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." I knew he couldn't hear me, but I had to say it anyway. Later that night, the detective told us they had found surveillance footage from the motel. A woman had been seen leaving Mark's room just before the estimated time of his overdose. This wasn't a random act. It was calculated. The more they uncovered, the more twisted it became. It wasn't just a fluke. It was something darker, intentional and targeted. In the days that followed, as Mark remained unconscious, I worked closely with the police. I combed through his phone records, tracked down his few remaining friends, trying to piece together the shadowed corners of his life I had abandoned. That's when I discovered her, Dana, a woman with a history of preying on recovering addicts, pulling them into her schemes, and vanishing before anyone could stop her. She'd done it before, but no one had ever been able to pin anything on her. Emma was my strength during those days. I had always known she was compassionate, but I hadn't realized how fierce she could be until I saw her fighting alongside me for someone she barely even knew. She helped me draft statements for the police, reached out to legal contacts, and when I couldn't bear to sit in that hospital room any longer, she stayed in my place. She held vigil over my brother when I couldn't hold myself together. A week passed before Mark finally woke up. His eyes blinked open slowly, unfocused and glassy. I was sitting at his bedside, gripping his hand like a lifeline. He looked at me, confusion melting into clarity, and said, "You came." That simple phrase broke me. I wanted to spill every apology, every regret, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. He was alive. And in those 2 words, the first cracks in the wall between us began to form. There would be a long road ahead. Physically, emotionally, nothing about this would be simple. But something inside both of us shifted. The bitterness gave way to something more vulnerable, something closer to love again. Eventually, Dana was arrested. It turned out she was part of a larger network exploiting vulnerable people, many of whom never survived what Mark did. My brother had been lucky, incredibly lucky. The entire ordeal changed me. It forced me to confront how fragile life really is, how fast it can fall apart with one unexpected call, and how family, no matter how fractured, remains stitched into you no matter how far apart you drift. Now, months later, Mark is in a recovery center, truly trying this time. We speak every week, and each conversation chips away at the damage we left between us. Emma and I, somehow, through all of this, are stronger than ever. That one call, that jarring voice on the other end of the line, shattered the quiet of a peaceful afternoon, but in its wake, it built something new, something truer. It exposed every fracture I had ignored for years. And through the pain, it stitched a new bond, not just between me and my brother, but within myself. Sometimes it takes the worst kind of moment to show you what really matters. And sometimes, even the ugliest days carry the seed of healing. Family is messy, complicated, but it's still family. And in the end, that's what saved us.